started. Welcome. My name is Stephanie Nowen, and I am the director at the Center for Gender and Global Context, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to GenCen's very first colloquia of this academic year. If you're not familiar with our colloquia series, we offer these almost every month, once in September, October, November, and then again in January, February, March. And these are all folks around MSU's campus who are affiliated with the GenCen and are doing a range of different work related to women, gender, feminist theory and scholarship, and often social justice broadly. And so very, very delighted to invite, to welcome Dr. Christy Zhou Koval to give her talk today. Now, before I introduce her and her work, just a few housekeeping things. We do collect information about our colloquia series to identify where people are coming from in different parts of the campus or off campus, and what kind of value they're getting from this. And you'll get a very short survey as a registrant to the colloquium. And please respond to that survey. It just takes a little bit of time, and it's very helpful information for us in identifying how we're reaching people and to advocate for the center's activities. And also, Edwin has our new office manager. If you haven't met Edwin Serrano yet, Edwin came to us, about 2 months ago, and very happy to have him contributing. And he's put a link to that Qualtrics survey in the chat. So feel free also to click on that and respond before you leave today. So the most exciting thing about this is not me talking about the GenCen, it's about our guest speaker. So it really is my delight to introduce Dr. Christy Zhou Koval, who is an assistant professor at the Broad College of Business at MSU and core affiliated faculty with us. Very excited that I think, Christy, this might be the very first time we've had somebody from one of our affiliates from the Broad College present. So I'm really glad you were interested in doing this. So Christy received her PhD in Management and Organizations from the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University, and her HBA in Business Administration and MSc in Industrial Organizational Psychology from the University of Western Ontario. Her research focuses on diversity and inclusion in the workplace, stereotyping and bias, and intergroup relations. Her work has been published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, Leadership Quarterly, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Research in Organizational Behavior, Psychological Science, Social, Psychological, and Personality Science, and the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. She has won the Dorothy Harlow Best Paper Award and was a runner-up for the Saroj Parasuraman Outstanding Publication Award at the Academy of Management GDO Division. Prior to coming to MSU, she was a faculty member at the Management Department at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology Business School. Today, Dr. Christy Zhou Koval is going to talk about her research in natural hair bias in job recruitment. Again, we have just always great talks, but this one is segueing really well with the emphasis that GenCen is having this year on gender and racial discrimination in the workplace. And so really happy to have her talk kind of kick this off. So I will hand the proverbial mic over to you, Christy.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be presenting my work to this group, to share my work with like-minded individuals. And so, as Stephanie mentioned, I do work on DEI issues. I specifically take a social psychological lens to look at some of the microprocesses that essentially identify sources of biases in the workplace that contribute to or perpetuate inequity in the workplace as well as society at large. And so today I'm going to present some of my recent work on intersectionality, specifically looking at the natural hair bias in job recruitment. So I will get started. Okay, so there has been a ton of work in the social sciences looking at sort of sources of inequity in the labor market. And in particular, what we know as social scientists is that there's in the process of job selection and recruitment, there's a lot of sort of sources of bias. And in particular, there's very robust and documented biases against racial and ethnic minorities. And oftentimes, subtle cues in applicant profile can signal applicants' racial or ethnic group membership, and that triggers some of these stereotypes or biases that in turn work against racial and ethnic minorities. So, for example, in some very large audit studies in the field where researchers distribute resumes and by randomly assign and manipulate the names of applicants. So what they found was that applicants with resumes containing, for example, Black sounding names such as Jamal or Lakeisha, they receive fewer callbacks than those without such cues, or in other words, white sounding names like Greg and Emily. And so this body of work has really shown that even just very subtle cues, whether it's in the applicant's name or profile, that can trigger sort of these biases in the job selection and recruitment process. And so with this backdrop, what the group that I'm particularly interested in doing my research on is looking at Black women and their experiences. And the reason I focus on this particular group is that, in the United States and North America in general, there's data that shows Black women face one of the highest unemployment rates at nearly twice the rate of white men. And this is based on census data. And in some other data suggests, Black women actually receive the highest wage gap out of all women groups in the US. More specifically, Black women were paid 65% of what non-Hispanic white men were paid. And this number is even significantly lower as compared to the 83% for all women groups. And so this indicates that Black women, out of all women groups, tend to receive the highest sort of wage gap and wage discrimination. And if you were to contextualize that stats a little bit more, what this is saying, the 65%, what this is saying is that it takes the typical Black woman 19 months to be paid what the average white man takes home in 12 months. And so this is the very significant difference. And so motivated by sort of this really, significant gap and inequity in the labor market. So I'm kind of interested in seeing or identifying what are some of the sources of biases that work against Black women in the labor market. And in particular, my work takes on an intersectional lens. And so what an intersectional lens does is we're trying to understand sources of biases and discrimination by considering the joint effects of different social categories or social categorization. So instead of looking at just racism or sexism as sources of biases, we actually look at the joint or intersectional effects of both race and gender. And some of my work in the last decade have really looked at, how do race and gender intersect to shape the experiences of women of different racial categories. And in this work, what I found was that, the experiences and perceptions of women of different racial groups differ significantly, such that, you know, the experiences of Black women are different from the experiences of white women, are different from the experiences of Asian women, and different from the experiences of Hispanic women. And so the argument here is that by taking an intersectional approach, we want to kind of identify specific sources of challenges that are faced by women of specific racial groups. And so examine not just sexism or racism, but rather the joint effect of sexism and racism. And so Kimberly Crenshaw was the one who originally coined the term of intersectionality back in 1989. And she says, you know, because the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism, any analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which Black women are subordinated. And so this is sort of the theoretical lens that I'm going to take on when I present my work today. And so specifically, I'm looking at a particular type of sort of cue that might be represent a source of bias against Black women in the labor market, and that is hairstyles. That Black women's hairstyles as a source of bias in selection and recruiting. And so what I mean by that. So you know, we're looking at, so here are some pictures of sort of the natural hair texture of Blacks or Black women, right? So what you see here is that the natural hair texture of most Blacks is pretty kinky, woolly, or tightly curled, right? Quite different from, for example, Asian hair, you know, have straight hair. You know, some of the most common African American natural hairstyles, as you can see in some of these pictures, include, you know, the afro, twists, dreadlocks, braids, and cornrows. And because of its distinct look and texture, Black hair is historically quite really an expression of identity and culture. You know, it's a representation of history, and it carries a lot of emotional significance, right? And, you know, so having this natural hair is really sort of, for African Americans, that has this deep historical significance or connection to, you know, a Black pride, culture, religion, and history. But, you know, but it kind of sort of the nature of the Black hair kind of also goes beyond just sort of the cultural significance. Because of its unique texture, it has been sort of treated and cared for quite differently than you know, European American hair or even, you know, Asian hair, right? You know, it has just the specific sort of elasticity and tight coils of Black hair kind of have these unique needs, right? So for example, because of these physical attributes, it make it pretty susceptible to breakage, right? And it cannot really be easily straightened without damaging the hair, or kind of, you know, or with chemical treatments, it can get, you know, can contribute to scalp disease, and of course is quite expensive for carrying your hair. And so this is sort of the natural hair and a little bit of background on sort of the natural Black hair, right? But, you know, alternative to wearing their hair naturally, you know, Black women or Blacks in general can choose to, you know, straighten their hair by using chemical or heat straighteners, right? And then to sort of achieve a more European American hair look. The issue there is, as I mentioned, because of sort of its unique physical property, it's very prone to damage, and it can damage the hair both in the short and long term. And it's also very time consuming. It's pretty expensive, and it certainly has these health implications. And so obviously, you know, for most of us, we think, oh, like how we want to do our hair, it's a personal choice. But as I'll show you some data, you know, for Blacks and, you know, Black women, the choice of how to wear hair, there are these sort of external expectations that they kind of have to consider when considering how to wear their hair. So what I mean by that is, you know, there has been some work looking at sort of the attitudes towards Black women's natural hair, right? that, there's some data showing, compared to Black women with straightened hairstyles, Black women with natural hairstyles are perceived to be more dominant or even less attractive. And in one of perhaps the largest IAT study, so like looking at implicit association attitudes, this study was done in 2016. The Perception Institute basically looked at, examined both implicit and explicit attitudes related to Black women's hair. So in other words, they did, in terms of their implicit test, they did this IAT, which is a pretty standard implicit measure of looking at racial or any sort of bias or attitudes, right? So you flash participants a picture of either straightened hair or textured hair, and you get them to like indicate their reaction of whether this hair is unpleasant, pleasant, attractive, or not attractive. And you kind of get sort of their implicit attitude towards, how people feel about natural Black hair. And then they also accompanied that IAT, that implicit study, with some explicit surveys as well. And then they sent this survey to a nationally representative sample of over 4,000 participants, including both Black and white participants. And so what the results showed was that in terms of their implicit association test survey, they found that majority of participants, regardless of race, showed an implicit bias against Black women's textured or natural hair. So it shows that, there's just this attitude or bias towards natural Black hair. And in terms of their more explicit survey findings, they found that, Black women reported to have experienced the highest level of anxiety about their hair as compared to white women. Black women also reported to spend more time, more money on products, and having professional styling appointments on their hair as compared to white women, and that 1 in 4 Black women have difficulty finding products for their hair. And so these survey findings show 2 things, right? One, again, is, there's this sort of this bias against, natural Black hair, and that Black women, feel this sense of like anxiety exactly because of this sort of attitude or this bias towards textured hair. And so this shows up a lot in the news in terms of this negative attitude or bias against natural Black hair. And so in a variety of different industries and services, we've seen news reports showing, there's basically biases in the work setting against natural hair, right? So this person was sent home by their boss after being told that her hairstyle was not appropriate, even though she was just wearing again, this is one of the natural hairstyles. So, in the service industry, in the military, they've since rolled back restrictions on Black hairstyles, but it used to be, they in the U.S. military, and this includes, the Army, Air Force, and Navy, they used to call sort of natural hairstyles as sort of unkept and matted, and then that was forbidden from their grooming guidelines. They've since then rolled back these restrictions, but it kind of shows you kind of historically sort of these negative attitudes towards again, natural hairstyles, right? So this is just an example of what they called as female unauthorized hairstyles, like twists and braiding. And again, you see this in, reports at the airport, right? TSA agents reportedly say body scanners may single out Black women because of their hair, right? Again, sort of showing that there's this bias and discrimination because of just how they wear their hair. You see this in school settings, right? The athletes were asked to cut off their natural braids. This is even as young as elementary schools, where kids were, there's specific guidelines about what are so-called appropriate or inappropriate haircuts, right? And so this is another one, fairly recent. These are, news reporters or anchors. They have talked about, their experiences, their at news networks where, they weren't given the flexibility to wear their hair naturally. They were kind of forced to straighten their hair for their on-air appearance. And so, so all of this, right, like kind of have shown that there is this sort of general bias towards kind of, how Black women wear their hair, right? Or especially natural hair. And so, I work at a business school. The outcomes that I primarily look at are related to, the workplace, right? And one thing I look at, as I mentioned earlier, I try to identify sources of biases and inequities in, settings such as employment settings or job recruitment or selection settings. And so even there, when you just, read the news, there is a ton of reports showing that, Black women worry that their natural hair could affect their job employment or retention, preventing them getting that job. And so when I started this research, I think, almost 10 years ago, right? So, when if you were to just kind of Google unprofessional hairstyles for work versus professional hairstyles for work, Google image returned these very drastically images, right? Now, I don't know if you were to do it these days, if that's still the same search you will get, but this is what I got, when I first started doing this research. And so if you were to Google, type in unprofessional hairstyles for work, you see a set of images on the left. So essentially they're basically all natural hair styles of Black women. Whereas if you Google professional hairstyles for work, and you see a set of sort of straightened European American hair. And so again, I think it demonstrates that there could be this systemic bias against Black women with natural hair in the labor market. And so that was, really the motivation behind, my research question, right? Is there, so far I've shown you there's this media reports of that there's this potential bias that exists. So I wanted to empirically test it using, vigorous scientific methods. And so my research question is, then is there a natural hair bias against Black female job applicants in job recruitment? So specifically looking at natural hair bias in job recruitment settings. And so today I'm going to show you the findings from my 4 studies that I conducted. So this research is wrapped up and it's published in 2020 in the social psychology and social psychological and personality science. And so this is work I've done with my co-author Ashley Shelby-Rosette at Duke University. And so we essentially predict that Black women with natural hairstyles may be perceived as less professional and less competent than women with straightened hairstyles, which will in turn negatively affect their likelihood of obtaining job interviews. And so we're trying to, in this work, unpack the mechanisms, specific mechanisms that are hindering their likelihood of obtaining job interviews. And so I'll kind of walk you through some of the theories behind this, as well as I'll show you the findings from the 4 studies that I conducted. So, I start off by looking at kind of what are the predictors of job recruitment outcomes, right? And there has been these meta-analyses finding a very strong relationship between applicant appearance and the recruiter ratings. And specifically, those who are deemed to be appropriately dressed and groomed are perceived to be more professional and more hireable. And so as in the job search literature, we know that professionalism or perceived professionalism is positively associated with job selection or job recruitment outcomes. And so with regards to applicant appearance, what the research shows is that applicant appearance is a sort of a norm activator for recruiters. So meaning that recruiters look to applicants' appearance to decide whether or not this person is considered sort of normative for the job or for the industry, right? And so that any dress or grooming choices that deviate from recruiters' expectations would signal a norm violation, and these applicants tend to be perceived more negatively, and also, therefore, and consequently receive less favorable outcomes in job recruitment. However, the criteria that is used to evaluate what is considered professional is actually quite elusive. And oftentimes, these criteria are based on cultural norms or tacit assumptions about what is appropriate at work. And this is where we argue sort of biases and stereotypes come in. And it is in the specific context of natural black hair, we argue that natural black hair is incongruent with the standard of professional in Western workplace, which subsequently lead to Black women wearing natural hairstyles being penalized for in these processes and settings. And in particular, there is what we call the white standard of beauty in Western societies. Just historically, European Americans have higher status in society, and the way they dress, the way they appear, that kind of becomes the standard, not only as a status symbol, but also in terms of the standard for beauty. And that is especially the case, and one of the and so the white standard of beauty has been considered as an implicit assumption to evaluate what is considered professional in the workplace. For women specifically, head hair is a very important source of identity, right? The feminine beauty, right? And having straight hair, especially for women, is considered as a notable standard for professionalism. And so even if you're looking at some of these literature, it says, appropriate business attire and quote unquote properly combed hair reflect norms that are generally expected during job recruitment. And so this suggests that, there is this expectation that the way you groom your hair is an important part of sort of the applicant appearance package that recruiters look for, and in particular, having straight hair is considered as a standard for professionalism. And so as a result, natural black hair deviates from this standard. And so it therefore violates this implicit assumption of what a normative or what a professional job applicant should look like. And so that's kind of sort of part one of our logic, is that for Black women, having natural hairstyles would lead to them to be perceived as less professional in job recruitment settings. And furthermore, we argue that natural hairstyles may also raise doubts about their competence. There has been prior work showing that professional appearance is a strong predictor of a person's perceived competence, right? Such that applicants who adhere to professional expectations are perceived to be more intelligent and competent and receive more favorable job market outcomes than those that do not. And so we therefore hypothesize that to the extent that natural hairstyles negatively affect Black women's perceived professionalism, it may also in turn affect their perceived competence, and subsequently result in negative evaluations in judgment. And so in this study, I primarily focus on looking at Black women. And so one question is, well, what about Black men? The reason we focus on Black women and with regards to natural hair is for a couple of reasons, right? The first one is, as I mentioned earlier, head hair really is a very important source of female identity, and so for women, it certainly matters quite a bit. And furthermore, there's for men, the standard for hair tends to be a little bit different, right? In general, for men, the guidelines just kind of keep it short, right? And so it triggers when the hair is short, it triggers less of this sort of negative biases. And then given that, again, I'm taking an intersectional lens, I'm looking at specifically sort of the effect of how the joint effect of racism, so being Black, and sexism, so being a female, and how that influence Black women's experiences with regards to their hairstyle and their outcomes in the job market. Okay, so that's kind of my theory and hypothesis, right? So again, hairstyles, to the extent that natural hairstyles negatively influence Black women's perceived professionalism, that should also negatively influence their perceived competence. That should also therefore lead to worse interview outcomes. And so that's sort of the theoretical model that I'm working on with. And so then I conducted 4 studies to test my theoretical model. And so study 1 was a correlational study, and studies 2 to 3A and 3B are experiments that we conducted. So let me show you what we did exactly. In the first study, so we surveyed 480 US general population adults, and we used a 2x2 within subject design. So what I mean by that is we manipulated the race of the, so in this study, and I'll show you on the next slide, we essentially said you were to ask participants to evaluate the Facebook profile of a potential job candidate. And in here, we showed them pictures of both Black and white female, again, I'm just focusing on women in my studies, female applicants, and also varied the hairstyles they had. So I'll show you that in a minute. And so we asked participants to take the perspective of HR managers. We asked them to evaluate job applicants based on their Facebook profile. And altogether, each participant evaluated 32 Facebook profiles. So all of these profiles are randomly ordered so that we don't create any confound. And so first, we asked participants to read just briefly kind of this job announcement, right? It's a consultant position at a GMH consulting firm, and then we talk about, so the type of candidates we're looking for, right? And, the job responsibilities they'll have within the firm. So kind of a generic job description of this consultant position job. And then we showed them profiles of 32 female job applicants. And here we used different profile pictures of Black and white women with various hairstyles. And so here's an example of what a profile picture looks like, right? So here, we have a picture of the job applicant, and then we blur out intentionally of their names. So we say, as our cover story, we blurred out their names for confidentiality reasons. So really, in the study, we want our participants to focus on the picture that they see. And then the picture, in fact, is the only sort of variable that we manipulate and change throughout the survey. Okay, so we showed them, for example, a set of Black women with natural hairstyles, right? So we varied the exact hairstyle, and we also varied the length of hairstyle, right? We just do kind of a headshot. Some participants had more formal clothing, some had less formal casual clothing. That didn't seem to make a difference. We also showed profiles of Black women with straightened hairstyles. Again, we varied in terms of the exact style and length of the hairstyles. And so participants have seen, so these are the profiles of Black job applicants that our participants saw, but we also wanted to show them a group of white women and with sort of corresponding hairstyles. Corresponding meaning that white women with curly, in this case curly hairstyles, as well as white women with straight hairstyles. So we wanted to use white women as a control group, just to then we can be able to kind of compare the effect to see whether is it that all women with curly or natural hairstyles get penalized? Is it that there's an overall preference for straightened hair, or is it that Black women receive the most penalty for wearing their hair naturally? And so in total, participants saw these Facebook profiles of these 32 different job applicants, and again, the order in which they viewed each of the profiles was randomized. And after seeing each profile, participants were asked or given these questions that they need to rate on each of the applicants. So we measured perceived professionalism, so how polished, refined, professional looking, and respectable does this applicant appear to be. We also measure perceived competence, so how qualified, competent, effective, and good at the job does the applicant appear to be. And finally, their interview recommendation. How likely would you to select the applicant for an interview? So let me show you the results. So I'm going to show you three charts here. The first one's for our professionalism dependent variable, and then competence and interview. So what you see here is, so the black bar is for Black women with straight hair. The red bar is for Black women with natural hairstyles. The green bar is for white women with straight hairstyles. And finally, the purple bar is for white women with curly hairstyles. And so what you see here is, for Black women with natural hairstyles, they received the lowest rating across the four groups in terms of professionalism. And that difference was statistically significant, right? And we see a similar pattern in terms of competence. Again, Black women with natural hairstyle were perceived to be the least competent as a group as compared to all these four different race and hairstyle combinations. And finally, the same pattern for interview outcomes. And so this what this is showing, I think, is an intersectional effect, right? So it's not just hairstyle, it's not just race, right? Is the specific combination of being Black and having natural hairstyles that lead to these low or the lowest ratings. And then we did a series of mediation analyses, looking at testing that theoretical model I showed you earlier. So what we found was that, the figure A is the results for white job applicants, and figure B is the results for Black job applicants. So interestingly, in this mediation analysis, what we found was that curly or natural hairstyles, regardless of race, actually have, for both Black and white women, having non-straightened hair actually lead to worse perceived professionalism, and professionalism is positively correlated with competence, which and then competence furthermore positively predict interview recommendations. And so interestingly, these set of results are actually saying, in general, there seems to be a general preference for straight hair, regardless of race. And this is consistent with what we've seen so far in terms of having straight hair as is seen as a standard for kind of the workplace settings. But I wanted to remind you is that, again, looking at these means, really it is the Black women with natural hairstyles who receive the lowest ratings across the four groups. And so these are the study one results. Okay, so having done this correlational study, we wanted to conduct some follow-up controlled experiment where we wanted to control for the actual job applicant. So as you recall, in study 1, we showed participants 32 different profiles. So obviously there's quite a bit of noise there, right? There's variability in physical attractiveness, perceived age, different hairstyles. And so that could impact the results of our studies. And so we wanted to make sure that the effect we're seeing in study 1 are really due to hairstyles specifically, and not any of these other variables. And so in study 2, we conducted a controlled experiment where we controlled for the actual job applicant, and we manipulated their hairstyles only. And we also provided, just as study 1, job relevant information. And so in this study, we again recruited about 300 participants from the US general population. In this study, we used a 2x2x2 between subject design. So there were 8 experimental conditions in total, and participants were randomly assigned to one of the 8 conditions. And we used 3 factors. So in this one, we manipulated the race of the job applicant such that the applicant is either a Black woman or a white woman. We also manipulated the hairstyle of the job applicant such that the job applicant either has straight hair or curly or natural hair. And finally, just for comparison's sake, we also, and generalizability's sake, we manipulate the hair length such as it's below or above shoulder. So before I show you the images of the job applicants for each condition, this is basically, we said, we told our participants, so in this study, you were to evaluate a job applicant for a consulting job based on their LinkedIn profile, right? And so compared to Facebook, now LinkedIn is more, considered professional and more specifically for job settings. And so again, we showed participants this LinkedIn profile, and I'll show you the specific image that'll pop up depending on the experimental condition that participants received. Same as study 1, participants rated applicants on their perceived professionalism, perceived competence, and the likelihood to select for an interview. Okay, so here are the experimental, how we manipulated the applicants. And so again, we use identical image for the Black applicants, and also same identical image for the set of for white women. So here we manipulated same person, but we just changed their hairstyle using Photoshop, right? We have straightened hair and natural hairstyles. And these are the comparable conditions for our white job applicant. And so again, we manipulated same person, but we manipulated their hairstyles. And so we just, for each of the experimental condition, we just show them that picture to our participants. Okay, so let me show you the results. So again, participants, were asked to indicate the applicant's perceived professionalism, perceived competence, and the likelihood that they would grant them an interview if they were an HR manager. Okay, so again, I'll show you 3 sets of bars here. The first one column is professionalism, the middle one is competence, and finally the cluster on the right will be interview. So again, here we see that replicating what we found in study 1, Black job applicant with natural hairstyle again received the lowest rating. Professionalism as compared to the other 3 groups. Same pattern for competence. And finally, same pattern for likelihood to be selected for a job interview. So again, we're showing this sort of intersectional effect where it's not just being Black, or it's not just having natural hair, right? It's the combined effect of, being Black and having natural hair that kind of renders these job applicants to be the less professional, less competent, and less likely to be receiving a job interview. Again, we did a series of mediation analyses just to test for causal paths. The figure A is the mediation model for white job applicants, and figure B is the mediation model for Black job applicants. So here, the one difference is that we actually did not find hairstyle to matter for white applicants. So regardless of regardless of how they wear their hair, for white women, it didn't matter. However, and that's what we predicted for Black women, and that's the figure on the bottom, figure B there, we see that having natural hairstyle negatively predicted perceived professionalism, and perceived professionalism is positively correlated with or predicts competence, and competency in turn positively predicts interview recommendations. And so here, in a more controlled experiment, what we're finding is that really is Black women with natural hair that's really receiving this natural hair bias penalty, whereas for white women, it didn't really matter. Hairstyles didn't seem to really matter. Okay, so those are the results. So collectively, study 1 and study 2 give us some confidence that there is, indeed there seems to be this natural hair bias that's present in the job selection and recruitment process. And so the next step we wanted to see is, are there sort of boundary conditions to this effect that we're finding? And we sought to test the moderating effect of industry. The reason for that is different organizations vary in how forgiving they are in terms of dress codes, right? And for example, in the consulting industry, if you're thinking about management consulting, there's a very sort of restrictive standard for how you should dress when you're, client facing, right? Versus advertising, because there's priority for creativity. There's more flexibility in how employees could or should be dressed when they're working. And so indeed, in a pilot test, we found that consulting industry is perceived to have a stronger dress norms than the advertising industry. And we hypothesized that this natural hair bias may be worse or exacerbated in industries with stronger dress norms. Again, to the extent that appearance is seen as a sort of a norm, seen as a indicator of whether or not this applicant is normative for the industry, right? And especially then in industries with stronger norms, this effect should be stronger. And so that's what we sought to test in studies 3A and 3B. So study 3A and 3B use pretty much similar method, but we just with two differences. The first one is we use different samples for study 3A and 3B. So study 3A, we actually use MBA students, so that these are students, obviously with a bit more, compared to the general population, have a bit more experience, especially, they're working for professional service firms. And study 3B, we just like previous studies, surveyed from the US general population. And so in study 3, participants, so here we, again, so in study 3, we only looked at Black women. So here we're no longer looking at white women because that fact seems to be fairly established. So we're just looking at sort of, does industry moderate the effect on that natural hair bias against Black women specifically. And so in this study, we varied the job that applicants were applying for. So you can see here in the same job description, but we just varied which industry they're applying for. In the red font, it's if they're applying for a job in the consulting industry, consulting firm, they're hiring a senior analyst for your firm. And then we talk about the job responsibilities of the senior analyst within the consulting firm. And then whereas in the blue font, we're saying you're hiring for an advertising agency, specifically you're hiring for a creative designer, and the specific responsibilities of the creative designer. And then we chose senior analyst and creative designer because, just according to our research, these two positions seem to be fairly comparable in terms of their level in the organizational hierarchy, as well as how much they get paid. So they're fairly comparable, just within different industries. Okay, and so again, we showed participants, you say, imagine you're HR manager for either this consulting firm or this advertising industry, and here is, and you're here to evaluate the job applicant. So here's a LinkedIn profile of this job applicant. So again, we showed them a similar layout of this job applicant's, name, education background, work experience, and so on, except we, again, manipulated the image, right? So remember I said earlier, study 3A and 3B are pretty similar, except for, how we sampled them, but also we just, for generalizability's sake, we use different stimuli for study 3A and study 3B. So study 3A, here are the pictures we used to represent, natural hair and straight hair. So again, same model, right? We just Photoshop them so that they have different hairstyles. And study 3B, those we just use different models. Again, just Photoshop to vary their hairstyles. And so that we can know with confidence that if we were to find that an effect in our studies, it's due to the hairstyle specifically, not any of these other characteristics. Okay, so let me show you study 3A's result. So here it's I'm broken down my results by these different conditions by industry, right? So we have results that are looking at the professionalism ratings for within the consulting industry, and then the second column is the competence ratings within the consulting industry. And then the third column is the rating for interview outcomes within the consulting industry. And then the fourth column is about professionalism within the advertising industry. And the fifth column is about competence within the advertising industry. And finally, interview outcomes within the advertising industry, right? So this is, again, as you may recall, participants are randomly assigned to read either about consulting or advertising. So so here are the findings for professionalism ratings. So the gray bar is for the applicant with just natural hair. So again, study 3A, 3B, we use different models, but we varied whether they had straight hair or natural hair. So the gray bar is for natural hair, and the red bar is for straight hair. And we find a significant difference in terms of perceived professionalism between these two job applicants within the consulting industry. Okay, and we actually, and here are the results for competence ratings within the consulting industry. Here, within study 3A sample, we actually did not find a significant difference. And finally, for interview, we did find a significant difference between the black women candidates with natural hair versus straight hair, such that those with natural hairstyles, those two natural hairstyles were given less favorable interview outcomes. So the question was, how likely would you be to interview this person? So those are the results for the consulting industry. And as you may recall, our hypothesis was that because the consulting industry has stronger dress norms, so these natural hair bias should be activated more so in the consulting industry. And we see that this pattern generally replicate with the exception of competence findings, at least within the specific sample. And then the other part of our hypothesis is that in industries with weaker dress norms, this natural hair bias should be weakened. And so because advertising is generally perceived as having less or weaker dress norms, we had hypothesized that we might be less likely to find this natural hair bias in such an industry. So I'm going to show you the results here for advertising. And so indeed, as you see, we actually did not find a significant difference in ratings of professionalism across those with natural hair and those with straight hair. Same with competence, the ratings were not statistically significant from each other. And finally, we did not find a significant difference across the interview ratings. And so generally speaking, study 3A results supported our hypothesis that it seems like this natural hair bias is exacerbated in consulting as compared to in advertising. And so same study, and then we did it again in a different sample in study 3B. This is just with the general US population, and then we use a different set of models, as I showed you earlier. So again, same graph as I showed you. And so here are our professionalism findings. So within the consulting industry, we again found that job applicants with Black female job applicants with natural hair were perceived to be less professional. They're also perceived to be less competent, and also they're also received less favorable job interview outcomes. And here again, I'm going to show you the findings for within the advertising industry. And again, same as in study 3A, we did not find a significant difference between the two hairstyles. And so they did not have an impact on professionalism ratings. Hairstyles did not have an impact on for competence, we actually did find a significant difference here, such that the natural hair is again perceived as less, the candidate with natural hairstyle was perceived as less competent, but we did not find a different effect for interview ratings. So there's some differences which are to be expected, in experimental studies with noise and different experimental stimuli with different population, but overall, these results are fairly consistent. And so let me just then show you sort of the mediation, our moderated mediation results. So the figure A is for the results so this is for study 3A. So figure A is for the results in the consulting industry, and figure B is for the results in the advertising industry. And so, figure A is for the advertising industry, and figure B is for the consulting industry. Got those reversed there. And so what we see here within study 3A, we found that within the advertising industry, so this is the figure A here, hairstyle did not impact perceived professionalism. In contrast, in the consulting industry, hairstyle was a significant predictor of perceived professionalism, such that those with natural hairstyles were perceived to be less professional. And again, professionalism significantly predicted competence, and ratings of competence significantly predicted interview recommendations. And so these findings supported our hypothesis that the industry is a significant moderator. Here are the results for study 3B. Basically, exact same finding, substantive finding as study 3A. Again, we did not find hairstyle to be a significant predictor of perceived professionalism in advertising industry, but we found that it was in the consulting industry. And so collectively, with the results from these 4 studies, we found that there is indeed this natural hair bias against Black women in the job recruitment and selection process, especially in industries that have strong dress norms. And so in summary, this work is really taking an intersectional perspective. We found that, although Black and white women share the same gender category, they may obtain drastically different job outcomes as a result of their race, right? Such that the natural hair bias is really, overall, if we're looking at all these results collectively, there's evidence that there's this natural hair bias against Black women. And then I think, given the backdrop of the sort of this inequity, right, looking at whether it's the unemployment rates or the wage gap for Black women, in that Black women really fare the worst across all, women groups, we suggest that the natural hair bias might actually be a contributing factor to these gaps that Black women face in the US labor market. And that, again, we found that there's this critical boundary condition of industry or just dress norms across the industry. And so in terms of implications of this work, obviously, being able to identify a hair as a sort of a subtle cue and a source of bias in the labor market. And we think that this is quite important of a finding in the age of social media, where, recruiters, over 80% of recruiters are likely to look up or Google a job applicant before they even decide on whether to offer them a job interview. And so to the extent that, a recruiter just clicks or Googles and then job applicant and see a picture of their profile picture and base their decisions based on, their image or their hairstyles. And this could be really problematic in that, the biases can occur even before the job interview process even starts. And so we think that these findings have important implications for, talent attraction and management and hiring and recruiting in the age of social media. And we think that these findings also have an impact that's beyond just recruiting and selection, right? Thinking about incumbent employees in a workplace, right? There's and then to the extent that there's this natural hair bias and that, racial minorities trying to fit in. So this has lots of implications on sort of their sense of belonging, or like having feeling the pressure that they need to conceal their true authentic selves in order to fit in and to belong. So there's this research uncovering that we think our work dovetails on that. And that, to the extent that this natural hair bias becomes, it can be quite problematic, as I mentioned earlier. It's very costly. It's not great. It could contribute to health problems, right? To the extent that this becomes a burden that Black women feel that they must straighten their hair to fit in, this could be a contributing factor to the pipeline problem and minority representation in the workplace. And in this particular context, we looked at the experience of Black women, but we think that there might be similar processes that are going on for other racial minority groups as well, whether it's hair or like facial coverings and so on. And this work also, we think, have implications for public policy and policymakers, especially with regards to providing evidence-based results that kind of support the push or the movement of the Crown Act, which so now the different states are various speed in trying to kind of make natural hair bias discriminatory in their workplace. And so we think that our work also speaks to that. And finally, we think that these intersectional effects could move beyond just race and gender, right? There, for example, could there also be intersectional effect of ageism and sexism? So there has been a recent sort of controversy regarding the firing of a very well accomplished and famous news anchor in Canada, Lisa LaFlamme. So she was a news anchor on CTV, so national television for Canada. She was at the network for 35 years. And during the pandemic, she was like, couldn't have access to her hairstylist. And her hair was going gray. So she said, I'm just gonna let it go. And so she basically let her hair go gray. And recently she was let go by the network, even though she still had at least a year left on her contract. And so this kind of sparked a lot of controversy about her apparent firing? Is it because of her hair, right? So, I think that there is certainly something to be said about age and gender. And again, it's sort of seeing this intersectional effect and how these cues, these subtle cues, which are really irrelevant to your actual competence, play a role in sort of your obtaining work opportunities or your continued success at a workplace. And so that's all from me. Thank you so much. If you look forward to our Q&A that's coming up, and if you have any questions or want to get in touch with me, here's my email address. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christy, for that great talk. And just a reminder, we do have a Q&A box that you can put questions in, or you can put questions in the chat if you want to request like a raise a hand. I'm happy to call on you as well. And just a note, this came up in the Q&A earlier in the talk. A couple people had asked about recordings. If you want to watch this later, or you want to refer a colleague to it, we will be posting the recording on our website. So you'll have to go to the GenCen's homepage, but near the bottom, you'll see a place where we post recordings of our colloquia. So I will open it up to the audience and see if anybody has any questions. I have one that I'd love to kind of pose to you, Christy, to get us started, and then maybe other folks will jump in. So I did notice that while Black women with natural hair experienced a number of discriminatory treatment in all these different outcomes that you had, that Black women with straight hair seemed to fare quite well. And I'm curious, I have some thoughts about why that might be, and how Black women with straight hair might be read very differently, kind of in opposite ways. Mm-hmm. That, Black women who wear their hair, natural hairstyles might. But I'm wondering if this has come up among you and your team, and if you have some ideas about why that is.
Sure, yeah. So I think there's it's like we're thinking about social dominance theory, right? How, thinking about it's all about maintaining the social hierarchy. And so if to the extent that Black women choose to, wear their hair straight, and if that's perceived as, again, this is a personal choice, right? They should be able to do whatever they want. But to the extent that this choice is being perceived as like a cue of assimilation, right? And then therefore maintaining the social hierarchy. And I think that is, that could, from the perceiver's perspective, again, thinking about the decision makers and those who hold, powerful positions in society, and I think those could lead to potentially more favorable outcomes. The other thing I think of is there has been some other research, intersectionality, looking at how even just label of African American versus Black, and how that triggers different perceptions of social class. And such that, if we're saying Black, those are actually like perceived more negatively, and people make more negative attributions than if you're labeling someone as African American. And so I think there are certainly it's a very visible cue that people take on and to make these inferences.
And for those that want to email Christy later, I just put your email address in the chat as well. People can copy that. Does anyone else want to jump in with a question?
I see one hand.
Yes. So, and I think that must be Nicole. I'm trying to, okay, here we go. Got you, Nicole. Please ask your question.
Thank you. I was trying to figure out how to mute. I was curious if you've considered or have you already added another element of looking at colorism and kind of skin color and curly hair and how that maps on for Black women?
Yeah, so we looked at skin color as like, and then different markers of prototypicality. Even controlling for those, we still found that there's this effect.
Interesting. Thank you.
Probably help if I unmuted myself. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, there's one from Sheba. Please go ahead.
Hi, it was so nice listening to this presentation. And my question is, I believe there has been some kind of ongoing awareness regarding this issue. And so I'm just curious to hear if you've seen any movement in terms of shifting mindsets regarding this issue of the bias of natural hair.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, especially in the last few years, I've definitely seen, you know, I think the Crown Act is one, you know, from the top down, there's sort of really policymakers starting to care about these, and even the growing sort of the naturalista community, right? Where more and more Black women are, you know, saying, hey, I'm just gonna, you know, wear my hair naturally. And then there's like a recent story about news anchors, they decided just to wear their hair naturally. I think definitely I'm seeing that there's this movement, you know, really sort of away from just feeling like the pressure to be conform to this standard, white standard of beauty, right? So so yes, definitely. And I'm optimistic that, you know, as we progress it's been made, and hopefully we'll see more and more in the future days.
Other questions? I did wonder about the Crown Act. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And I know about it, but I don't know what the specifics around the effort of how to define discrimination based on hairstyle. So maybe you have a better sense of how this law is supposed to address the kinds of findings that you had and reduce those.
Right. So my understanding, and I don't think certainly don't claim to be an expert on it. My understanding is that like currently there's no federal laws that sort of prohibit this form of discrimination like based on hair, but it's more up to the state to kind of various extent of passing laws that kind of prohibit hair-based discrimination. And I think, you know, some states are more progressive than others, and I know Michigan's certainly trying to push its own Crown Act, but much of that is still in process and to be debated. So I don't have a definitive answer of where we're at and how, even in terms of how they define it. I think it kind of just varies based on the states, and then it's very dynamic, and then there's still but definitely I've seen more and more states and legislatures really joining that conversation lately. And
it does seem, I mean, your findings seem to speak to the importance of it, because it is a way in which racial discrimination moves into this process in ways that if you're not understanding how natural hair is connected to Black women's culture in the US, but also in many other countries, and connected to identity and is politicized, that it doesn't, you might not see it as racial discrimination, even though it absolutely is.
Right, yeah, for sure.
We have a question in the Q&A. Are there specific strategies you recommend HR professionals consider implementing within the company's talent management processes to help mitigate the natural hair bias and name bias?
And so there are a couple of things I think different. I'm just pulling, I actually had a couple of slides on, like, you know, what people do, right? So, you know, in terms of, were you thinking about the recruitment process? One thing a lot of companies moving towards too is blinding, right? So this idea that you try to do a blind assessment of job applicants where you don't have, you know, looking at pictures or have names of job applicants, but of course recognizing that in the age of social media, that's actually quite difficult to do. And I also know that some companies have done like voice masking, where they just use the algorithm that completely blinds, like especially in STEM, right? Like to try to reduce gender discrimination, just have like an algorithm that you cannot tell whether the applicant is the gender of the applicant. So those have been done with various success because of these, like, you know, you can still, whether it's you can still find someone's profile online, or that, you know, there are other linguistic cues that leaks your gender identity. So what I would say, there are a couple of sort of evidence-based approaches that seem to have worked well. One is joint evaluation of job applicants. So typically what recruiters do is they look at one applicant at a time, right? One resume at a time, move on to the next and move on to the next. But what they behavioral scientists have found is that if you look at two applicants at the same time, you literally put one profile next to each other. So this is what we call joint evaluation. Then you tend to focus on the more relevant information, such as your job experience and your level of competence, as opposed to these irrelevant cues like, you know, race, gender, social class background. So that seems to be one strategy that has pretty good success. And another strategy that is based on some recent work is to, you know, usually have a short list of applicants. So the recommendation is just try to make your short list longer. To reach that quota of what you want in terms of representation, because even in the shortlist process, there's a lot of biases that go into it. So if you kind of make a conscious effort to like intentionally increase and make your shortlist longer, it actually also helps to reduce some of these biases.
That's interesting. Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Zhou Koval? Doesn't look like it, but please, if you're feeling shy, you know, post something in the Q&A or chat real quick. But I will thank you, Dr. Zhou Koval, for giving this great presentation. And again, it is being recorded, so we will have it up, I would say, in about a week. And you know, this is kind of a theme that GenCen is focusing on a lot this year, is different kinds of intersectional discriminatory inequities in workplaces. Many of you know that GenCen's working on an NSF Advance grant that we're putting in for this November. And you know, we brought in Lisa Vesterland, who was one of the co-authors of the No Club, about non-promotable tasks that women are doing. And so, Christy, this was a really great contribution to that theme. Christy's, again, email is in the chat if you want to reach out to her. I'm sure she would and look up her work on Google Scholar and MS2 Scholar, and please respond to the survey that you'll get at the probably, I think, later this afternoon or sometime in the next couple days, and come back on October. I should know this. October 21st, Carla Pfeffer, who's the director of the Sexual and Gender Minority Health Consortium, is going to be giving a talk on her research. And so look for opportunities to register for that. So Christy, thank you. This was really super. Appreciate your time and appreciate everyone's attention on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you so much. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.